Going live. All right. Sorry, I guess I wasn't really ready. Now I'm ready. Okay. We're gonna pick up where we left off yesterday. Read in the morning a little bit. I shaved my mustache. Big changes. We'll just get going. Someone with a greater regard for alliteration than the truth. Someone with greater regard for the alliteration than the truth once said that the principal productions of Burma were pagodas, pongis, and pariah dogs. As a superficial impression, this is neat, and therefore it will continue to be quoted by forcible feebles to the end of their days. In Bayswater or Ealing, it certainly is marvelous to how many pagodas there are in the country, far exceeding the number of those raised in the sacred island of Ceylon or by the Tibetans or in the Chinese. Pious Buddhists, though they have fallen into a sad doctrinal heresies, a Burman does not notice the multitude of the religious edifices in his country till he leaves it, and finds how far more sparing other nations are in their places of worship. The poorest villages have neatly kept shrines with the remains of others mouldering away around about it. No hill is so steep and rocky, or so covered with jungle, as to prevent the glittering gold or snow white spire rising up to guard the place from ghouls and sprites, and remind the surrounding people of the Savior Lord, the teacher of Nirvana and the law. There is good reason for this multiplication of fanes. No work of merit is so richly paid as the building of a pagoda. The Payataga is regarded as a saint on earth. When he dies, he obtains the last release. For him, there are no more deaths. The man who sets up a row of water pots on a dusty road does well. He who raises a tagon dying, or sacred host, who builds a rest house, presents an image or a bell, or found a monastery, gains much kutho and ensures a happy transcorporation when he passes away. But the Payataga is finally freed from the three calamities. His con is complete. The merits outweigh in the demerits, and he attains the holy rest. That at any rate is the most comforting belief cherished by the most reprobate. Little wonder that than that with such a glorious reward in store for him. The pious man hoards his wealth for such an object, and that pagodas are so plentiful in the land, it avails little to repair a previous dedication, unless it to be one of the great wonder world shrines at Rangoon, Pegu, Prome, or Mandalay. In the case of ordinary pagodas, the merit of the repair goes practically entirely to the original founder. Hence that puzzle to the Europeans, the building of a bright new place of worship close to one which a very little care would save from crumbling away into a simple tumults. Okay. I see. So it's saying that people don't fix the old ones because there's no merit. You don't gain any of the religious benefits. Okay. The word pagoda is seemingly a kind of verbal hysteron proteron, a metathesis of Sinhalese Dagoba, Dhagoba, derived from the Sanskrit Dhatu Garba, Dhatu Garba, a relic shrine, and is so Dhatu Garba is a relic shrine. It is properly applied only to a monument raised over some of the remains of the Lord Buddha. Such are Dat-da, pieces of Shin Gautama's flesh, An-da, his teeth, San-da, his hair, Shin-da, the frontal bone, okay, I'm going to skip all the rest of the bones. In addition to these, there are the sacred utensils and other articles used by the teacher of the law, such as the Thenghan, the yellow robe, tabet, or uh, alms bowl, the tong weda, his staff, the padi, or rosary, and other things of the same kind. These holy relics, however, could not go far even if they had been equitably divided between the great countries professing Buddhism, which they certainly were not. Burma alone claims more personal remains than could possibly have existed. The same thing is, I believe, true of popish relics in Europe, where pieces of the true cross are as abundant as portions of the dress of the founder are as abundant as portions of the dress of the founder of Buddhism are in Burma. It is useless attempting to prove or disprove the authenticity of particular relics. To admit of the multiplication of shrines, models of the sacred things are permitted, and these only in metal, precious stones, or clay are deposited under the vast majority of pagodas. But images and sacred books are also so enshrined, and thus arise the classification of the four kinds of shrines, the Zedi Leba. And so we continue to list the four types of shrines. Datu Zedi is erected over relics of the Buddha or models of these. The Paribawaga Zedi over the sacred eight utensils or their imitations. Then the Odetha Zedi is erected over encloses. There's images of the Buddha or pictures of the Buddha encircled with the pagoda. The Dhamma Zedi is enclosing the sacred book, such as the Vitagata Thanbang, the three baskets of the law, and the other sacred volumes, like the Bhagawa, appointed to be read during Lent. Okay, so those are the four kinds of shrines. It may be well to remark that the word pagoda is not known at all in Burmese, either in its English or Sinhalese form, any more than the word in Mandarin is known in China. Such a building is called a zedi, from the Pali chaitya, meaning the offering place or place of prayer, with the expression paya applicable as well to the image as to the shrine, is more frequently used in reference to the more famous centers of worship. The greatest of the payas, such as the Shway Dagon in Rangoon, the most famous of all, the Shway Ma Da, the Lotus Shrine of Pegu, the Shway San Da, the depository of the sacred hair at Prom, and the Ma Myat Muni, the temple of the most exalted saint in Mandalay. All these were founded by single individuals or brothers to whom the most excellent master had given hairs from his head to deposit in the specified place. How the exact spot was found and how successive kings increased the size of the first erection and donations flowed in from the pious in all parts of the world to beautify and preserve the buildings. All these particulars are recorded in the palm leaf records of the various temples. Many later zedi, however, have been erected by villages or by public subscriptions in whole districts as pious memorials to commemorate some particular event, as well as for the obvious purpose of public convenience on the duty days of the month. Very many among them, some of them the most beautiful, are, on the other hand, the outcome of purely individual desire for merit. Some, such as the chaste White Sibyo shrine at Mengong near Mandalay, are built in remembrance of individuals. The graceful pagoda mentioned being erected by a recent monarch in memory of a favorite queen. Under all, however, to render them sacred are buried some of the holy things. Without them, no hitai, HTI, or umbrella could be placed on the summit of the spire. These objects are deposited in the tapan taik, a square chamber built in the basement of every paya, and always the first thing finished. Not only one, but many things are thus enclosed. Captain Cox, who said the first beginnings of the huge Mengon pagoda, describes the Tapana Taik of the vast amount of brickwork. It measured 61 and a half square and was 11 feet deep. The interior was plaster white and gaily painted and was divided into a number of compartments of various sizes to receive the offerings of the king. Sheesh. All right. Nothing. The offerings of the king. The king. Where was that? Offerings dedicated by size. Receive the offerings of the king. In the countries, the innermost naturally containing the most sacred. The dedicated treasuries themselves were very numerous, including a great variety of miniature pagodas and monasteries in silver and gold of varying degrees of purity. Images of the same material and of polished alabaster, some of them 4 feet high, or a number of gold caskets, probably containing models of the sacred teeth and bone. Besides these, there was a miscellaneous collection of other things, such as slabs of colored glass, precious stone, white jars, such as are used by the royal families, and finally a soda water machine that almost as much a novelty in England as in Burma. The offerings did not strike Captain Cox as being very valuable, but the king Badabhaya cared a good deal more for his own special glory than for the raising of religion. Not long afterwards, he claimed to be a new Buddha, and because the sacred order would not recognize his right to the title, turned heretic and victimized the monks with renegade zeal. The relic chamber at the great Shway offers a very decided contrast. The Buddha gave 2 hairs of his head to 2 brothers, with his instructions to enshrine them on the Thudathana hill. An earthquake revealed the exact spot to them, and a host of Byamas and Net Dawas, Nat Dewas, came down to take part in the depositing of the relics. A chamber 10 cubits square was prepared, and at the bottom was laid a slab of pearly white marble set with diamonds. A similar slab, studded with emeralds, formed the lid. The Thagya king placed a golden cradle in the center of the bottom slab, and around this were arranged images of the chief disciples of Shin Gautama, each holding a golden each holding a golden bouquet. The jeweled casket containing the hairs was placed on the cradle, and high festival was held for many days. Numbers of other images of the Buddha himself and of many eminent disciples were placed around the sides of the Tapana Taik, and countless offerings were made, the Thagya king giving 10 billions of gold, each of his queens 40,000 of silver, the father of the 2 brethren of 1,000 of gold, and many other equally great sums. But this was in the brave days of old, when imagination was vivid and evidence cursory. Still, even nowadays, very costly offerings are often deposited in the relic chamber. An almost invariable gift is a representation in gold of the Lord Buddha with a hooded snake raising itself over him, as in the images of Vishnu in India, or a great model of the great master as he receives the supreme wisdom under the body bin. Examples of the last may be seen in the South Kensington Museum, as always, of the Sabupati Paya, representing him with the tower-like royal crown, the wings on legs and arms, and other emblems recalling the king's son who went out to dedicate himself as the Buddha in the conqueror of Manat. Open-handed piety is twice as frequent as of yore. Only the chroniclers of modern day have not the florid imagination of their predecessors. The dedication of a paya is a high festival, but there is no prescribed ritual in the sacred books, and each individual Pongyi, after reciting the precepts and the Itipada, has a form of his own, embracing portions of the law and the sacred discourses. A prominent function in the services, as indeed always is in giving alms, is the Yeset Cha, the pouring out of water drop by drop on the ground. The great king Bimbarthara did it himself from a gold cup when he presented the Welu One, or Bamboo Grove Monastery. And so likewise it is recorded of the rich man Anatta Bain. The idea is to share the merit of the action with all the creatures, and at the same time to call witness, besides the Mathandaya Nats, all gods and men, that the donor may have due reward for his piety. The same thing is frequently done in order to legally hand over a gift. As the water falls drop by drop on the ground, the Pongyis read out the formulae, the substance of which is as follows. Firm in my belief is the 3 precious things, the Lord of the law, and the assembly I make this offering that I may be freed from all present and future miseries. May all creatures suffering torment in the four states of punishment reach the happy seat of Nat Devas. May all my relatives, friends, and all men inhabiting the earth and the 10,000 worlds share in the benefits of this meritorious work. O earth and ye spirits, guardian of this place, bear me witness of the piety of this gift. It is worthy of note that it is explicitly stated that the inward disposition of the giver have nothing to do with the merit resulting from a good work. The merits are strictly proportioned to the degree of the sanctity or perfection of him who receives the alms. Hence the glorious release which awaits an otherwise bad man who erects a pagoda. Zeddies are of many shapes and degrees of elaboration, but one common idea may be traced through them all. If you ask the Burman monk the cause of the variation in the form of the paya, he will tell you that the Buddha left no instructions regarding them in the holy book, but had only said that a small mound should be raised over his bones in the form of a heap of rice. Apparently, from the relations in which the paya stands to the Buddha himself as the representation of the Holy One sunk in meditation. The ostensible objects is the preservation of relics, and these are to be laid in a shrine like the lotus bud, of which the Zeti is typical. And later, by an extending of the lines, this got the form of a bell or spire. In the Mala Lingaya Wutu, we are told that the infant Buddha in the womb of Queen Maya, Maia, resembled a lotus bud or a beautiful pagoda, and the conjunction of this idea with the simple original Tamils has undoubtedly led to the typical form as now seen in Burma. The names for various parts of the building all recall the ideas of the flower bud, with its young leaves folded in adoration. Thus, the rounded swelling just below the splendor spire is called the Net Pia Bu. The banana palm bud, and on the extreme summit at the top of the Hitai is the Seine Bu, the diamond bud, which in not a few poor districts is represented by a soda water bottle, which combines the resemblance to a flower bud with the good offices of a lightning conductor. The Hnet Pia Bu is usually surrounded with lavish adornment of the sacred lotus. The payas that rise up into a plain cone or spire are therefore the nearest to the original Tamils. The top being simply drawn out into a conical point. On the other hand, the bell-like pagodas are only a direct imitation of the lotus bud, and this has led to the more round dome-like forms, sometimes called Thabait Hamak, the inverted begging pot. This term, however, is applied to the swelling out round part of every pagoda, and has thence been borrowed to designate special shrines. It was nothing to do with the phallic worship, as some have imagined, nor is there any idea of the resemblance to a human skull. Such grim reminder of mortality, common in Tibet Buddhism, do not commend themselves to the Burman. Interesting. So, hopefully we don't spend too long talking about the architecture of pagodas. The buildings, I mean, this is somewhat interesting. Now, it's telling the story behind it. The buildings are all made of crumbling sun-dried brick, for it is enough to gratify the pious feeling of the moment, and even the long years that the most solidly built stone edifices might last will only be as an evanescent drop in the stream of eternity. Thus, the Burman sees no harm in building pagodas of sand or even cloth and pasteboard, and in the national annals, the victory which false shrines won over more substantial erections is a favorite theme. In Lower Burma, the payas are mostly of the simplest pattern derived from the archetypical rice heap and the lotus bud. They are solid pyramidal cones, rising with a gradual diminishing rounded outline and surmounted by a hatai, or umbrella spire. A construction resembling the musical instrument called a chapea chinoise, formed of concentric rings, lessening to a rod with a small vein called a hnet mana on top. They are almost without exception erected on more or less elevated platforms. Burma is quite different from other Buddhist countries, where the relics are exhibited on great feast days. The paya is perfectly solid, with the exception of the Tapana Taik, situated directly under the spire, and the Hitai, and there is no means of entering this to view the sacred relic. Did it really say and? Yeah. The addition of spires and the elaboration of the central pyramid are later thoughts and give hints of the great architectural efforts to be seen in Upper Burma. The peaks of Mount Myanmar are said to have furnished the first notion. In some cases, as at the Shway Sanda of Prom, the central spire is surrounded at its base by a circle of small gilded temples, or zedian, forming a continuous wall around the pagoda, each containing an image of the Buddha, and suggesting the idea that the Setiawala hills round the world, girding Thamodaya Sea, in almost all the larger payas, there are arched wings on each face of the lower platform, serving as it were as an antechapel, and each containing a large gautama. It is obvious how easily the introduction of these niche chapels led to the halls and aisles of the pagan temples. Still, this elaboration remains only a sign of architectural genius and not of greater sanctity. For in every case, the building itself serves only as a meet place for meditation and praise. In thought or words, the great temple of Pagan, with their galleries, transepts, and corridors, have more of the characters of churches in the ordinary acceptation of the word, and, the anada above, all with its echoing vaults and dim religious light, reminds one especially of some great cathedral of Middle Ages, but the outward magnificence of the pagan temples does not win for the reverence which is shown to vastly plainer built pagodas. Of all the shrine, the Shway Dagon Paya, the great pagoda of Rangoon, is and the most venerable place of worship in all of Indo-Chinese country, is the finest and the most universally visited. Its peculiar sanctity is due to the fact that it is the only paya known to Buddhists which contains actual relics, not only of Shin Gautama, but of the three Buddhas who preceded him in this world. In the Tapana Taik of the pagoda, along with 8 hairs from the head of the Buddha in the 11th Andrew cap, of whose cycle we are now living, there exists the Yethok Pala, the drinking cup of Kathan, the Thengon or robe of Ganagong, and the Tongwei or staff of Kathapa. Little wonder then the glittering gold spire of the last spur of the Pegu Hills attracts at the time of the annual festival. In March, pilgrims not only from the farthest parts of Burma, but from Cambodia, Siam, Korea, the stately pile stands upon a mound, partly naturally, partly artificial, which has been cut into 2 rectangular terraces, one above the other, each side, as is the case with all pagodas facing one of the cardinal points of the compass. The upper terrace, which has been carefully leveled and paved and repaved by the pious, rises 166 feet from the level of the ground and is 900 feet long by 680 feet wide, according to English measurements. The ascent was by 4 flights of brick steps, one opposite the center of each face, but the western approach has been closed by the fortifications built by the English conqueror to dominate the town and secure the pagoda, where there was so much desperate fighting in the Burmese wars. Ordinarily, other pagodas, the eastern flight is the most holy and therefore the most cared for, but the town of Rangoon lies to the south, and consequently this ascent is the grandest. At the foot are 2 gigantic leoglyphs, built on bricks covered with plaster and gaudily painted. From them up to the platform, the Songdan, the long stairs are covered by a rising series of handsomely carved teak roofs, supported on huge wood and masonry pillars. The heavy crossbeams in the paneling are in many places embellished with frescoes representing scenes in the life of the great master and his disciples, and with hideously curious representations of the tortures of the wicked in the fiery chambers of hell. The steps themselves are exceedingly primitive and dilapidated. They have been manufactured piece by piece, apparently by ardent seekers after merit. Here and there, they are made by broad stone flags from Penang and Bombay, but for a great part of the distance they consist of simple sun-dried bricks, worn almost into a slope by the pious feet of myriads of worshippers. Bare feet too, worshippers bare feet too, for none but Europeans are allowed to mount the steps with boots on. The stairs are wonderfully uncomfortable, not merely because they are so dilapidated, but because they are so seemingly constructed with the object of preventing anyone of the ascending or descending with unseemly haste. They are too broad to mount two at a time, and too low to suit Occidental tastes taken singly. This method of enforcing respect is characteristic of the Burmese nation, and reminds one of the nails which projected through the floor in the royal palace at Mandalay. The stairs debouch on a broad, open flagged space which run all around the pagoda and is left free from worshippers. From the center of this springs from an octagonal binat da, or plinth, the profusely gilt solid brick paya. It has a perimeter of 1,355 feet and rises to a height of 370, or at little higher than St. Paul's Cathedral. On the summit is the hitai, the gilt ironwork umbrella, on each of whose many rings hang multitudes of gold and silver jeweled bells, which tinkle melodiously and with every breath of air. This hitai is made and presented by Mindon Min, the second last king of Burma, and was placed on the summit as a cost by not much less than 50,000. It was constructed by voluntary labor and subscriptions in money and jewels, with which the vane and the uppermost band are richly studded. Flowed in from all parts of Burma, the old king, the governor of the Fifth Great Synod, strove hard to have it placed on the pagoda entirely at his own cost and by his own men. But the British government rightly and firmly refused, for had this been done, it would have been regarded by British Burman as an acknowledgment of his suzerainty. After considerable correspondence, it was handed over at the frontier to native officials and a body of Buddhist elders, by whom it was conveyed to the holy Thane Gutara Mount, and there successfully placed in position. The old hitai was lowered intact, and now stand on the platform, filled in and gaily painted like a small pagoda or a florid marriage cake, besides a still earlier decoration which it had supplanted. At the corners of the basement are somewhat Assyrian-like figures of Menot Thiha, creatures with two bodies and one head, half lion, half man, with huge ears and ruffled crests. And all round about are stone figures of lions displaying an ample show of teeth between their grinning lips. The tale is that long ages ago a king's son, who had been abandoned in the forest, was found by a lioness and suckled by her. When the prince grew to man's estate, he left his foster mother and swam a broad river to escape from her. The tender mother's heart burst when he reached the other's side, and she died. And in remembrance of her love, lions' figures are placed at the front of all pagoda steps and round the building itself. The four chapels at the foot of the pagoda are adorned at the sides by colossal figures of the sitting Buddha. And in the farthest recesses, in a niche of its own, is a still more goodly figure. The thick gilding, darkened in many places by the fumes of thousands of burning tapers and candles, hundreds of Gautamas, large and small, standing, and reclining, white and black of alabaster, sun-dried clay of the wood of the paine, the jack tree, gilded or plain, surrounded and are propped up plain, surround and are propped up on the large image. Even the figures in the niches are elaborated carved woodwork, representing figures dancing or fighting, and others flying through the air, or with head on hand, sunk in meditation. Monsters of the woods and hills and streams, high stone altars for the offerings of rice, and flowers standing before the lions. The offerings being made to the whole pagoda and not to them. Under the menat thihas, at the corner of the niche altars for burnt offerings on the outer edge of the platform, are a host of small zediyan, each with its hitai, ta songs, image image houses, overflowing with the gifts of generations of pilgrims. Figures of the Buddha in single low stone chapels, tagan dying, tall posts flaunting from which are long cylindrical streamers of bamboo framework pasted over with paper, depicting scenes in sacred history, and often just inscribed with pious invocations from the offerer. Others are surrounded by the sacred henta, the Brahmini goose, the emblem of the Talaings of the Kalawaik, the crane of the Burmese. Interspersed among these are on the outer edge of the open platform are multitudes of bells of all sizes, besides each bell of all of which are hung onto stout crossbeams supported by side posts lie deer's antlers and pieces of wood with which the worshipper strike them as he passes. He strikes the bell and then the ground to call the sky and the earth as witnesses to his prayer. On the eastern side, covered by a great wooden shed, hangs inside one of enormous size, inside which 5 or 6 men can stand with ease. It was presented by King Tharawadi in 1840 on occasion of a state visit to Rangoon, and the paya is measured 7 feet 7.5 inches across the mouth, 15 inches and it weighs 94,682 pounds. With a proper hammer, it ought to give forth a splendid sound, but the ordinary antlers and posts of wood used fail to do it justice. It is second in size in Burma to the great bell at Bengan, which, apart from the monster at Moscow, is the largest in the world. There is a long inscription on the Mahaganda at Rangoon, recounting the merits gained by the monarch who presented it, and praises of him chanted by the gnats guardians of the empire. The bell has a curious history. After the Second Burmese War, the English made an attempt to carry it off to Calcutta as a trophy, but by some mishap, the Mahaganda toppled over and sank to the bottom of the Rangoon River. English engineers made several attempts but failed to raise it. The Burmans, after some years, begged that the sacred bell might be restored to them. If they could, the sacred bell might be restored to them if they could recover it. Their petition was granted with a sneer, but they set to work, got it out, and carried it in triumph to the place where it now hangs. This success was ascribed by the thoughtful to supernatural aid, but the common people chuckled in a carnal and exulted manner over the victory, and not without very fair reason, for their appliances were of the most primitive kind. Buddhists fixed the date of the erection of the Shway Dagon Paya, but the site must have been sacred for cycles before since the relics of the 3 preceding Buddhas were found interred when the 2 Talaing brothers, Pu and Tapa, came with their precious 8 hairs to the Thaingutara hill. The original paya is said in the palm leaf history to have been only 27 feet high, and it has attained its present height by being repeatedly cased with an outer covering of bricks, by being several feet in thickness. Every now and again, it has been completely regilt. Sinbu Shin, King of Burma, towards the end of the last century, used his own weight in gold in the process. He scaled 12 stone 3 and 12 stone 3, a remarkably good weight for a Burman, and the gold used to cost over 9,000 pounds. The last occasion when the whole vast bulk was gilt was in 1871, when King Mindon sent his Hittite on every feast day, and Ubon. However, numbers of the pious clamber up wherever they can and fix on little squares of gold leaf packets of which can be brought at the stalls below for a few rupees. The consequence is that every now and again the spire breaks out in a rash of bright patches which give it a mysterious, rough, uneven appearance on clear moonlight nights. Of late year, a great part of the lower portions has been covered with thin plates of gold brought by the pious from all parts of the Buddhist world. It is difficult to say what the real age of the building is. If a skeptical Englishmen tell us we are not to place implicit faith in the palm leaf record, trustworthy documents trustworthy, trustworthy documents reach no further back than the time of the Peguan queen, Shin Sa Bu, who reigned in the early part of the 16th century. But there is every reason to believe that a pagoda existed there long before time. The shrine probably will never be altered again at all times and at all distances. It looks imposing and sublime, like the religion whose followers have built it. At the base of the pagoda hill are many monasteries embowered in their groves of palmyra palms and shady trees, and to the south is a small convent of nuns not far from the zayat which the king of Siam has built for pilgrims from his dominions. Similar rest houses line the Songdan all the way up the pagoda, and they always have occupants. While at the season of the feast in Tabong, they are crowded to overflowing. Lepers and cripples and nuns in their white robes line the steps and cry out in piteous tones for alms from the passerby. Near the top and round the platform itself are sellers of candles and colored tapers, Chinese incense sticks, and prayer flags, along with abundance of gold leaves. Numbers of young girls sit about with flowers, especially of the lotus, and meats of different kinds for offering. Others, these always enfranchised pagoda slaves, sell toys and and articles for household use. The platform is never deserted. Even long after midnight, the voices of the worshipper may have been heard in the night air, chanting in solemn monotone his pious aspirations, while on a duty day, and especially on a feast day, the laughing, joyous crowd of men and maidens in their gay national dress makes the platform of Shway one of the finest sights in the world. The Shway Paya is by far the most widely celebrated of the great Buddhist shrines, but there are others which, if not so venerated in other lands, still enjoy an even greater local reputation for sanctity, and attract pilgrims from all parts of Burma. In the dependent hills, with now and again a band of pious worshippers from distant countries, chief among these is the Shway Ma Da at Pegu, which commands Talang worship. Before even the shrine of the slanted beam of the Thaingutara hill, the pond close by it was covered with lotus blossoms. Immediately on the construction of the shapely spire and the great Thagya Min and countless Byamas, the Nash Devas assisted at the enshrinement of the relics. As with many other fanes, the king granted to the pagoda and set apart from secular uses forever. The whole space rounded on which the shadow of the original pile fell between sunset and sunrise. Several hundred families were dedicated to its service, and in 1881, large sums were raised throughout all the Low Country for the manufacture of a new Hittite and the gilding of the whole surface, while many wondrous signs in the neighborhood arrested the sacred character of the undertaking. Similarly, the Shway Sanda Prom, with its multitude of bells on the cramped hilltop, enjoy a special reputation on account of the prophecy there spoken by Shingatama himself in the connection of the Paya with the national hero king, Duat Tabong, as recorded in the sacred books, and proof of this there exists to the present day and may be seen at the foothills the hill, a huge stone with the inscription which none but the pure-minded can read, and few even of them understand. In other places, examples of this Dunganon, Kieganon, a kind of cipher writing cryptograph, as it appears to the unenfranchised, exists and usually records in mystic phraseology and inverted orthography the alms presented to the pagoda. Many of the lists of donations are, however, graven in less cramped kyak sa or stone writing, the givers having probably had a weak hankering after earthly fame. Thus a goodly marble slab with a long list of names may be seen at the Shway Ma Da, and a tablet near the Mya Thalon, the temple of the Emerald Bed of the Buddha. At Ma Gwe in Upper Burma records how Min Den and Min La go had in the year 2399 of religion covered the whole paya with yellow cloth, prepared it thoroughly, and had it painted red and gold. An exact account is given of the amount of materials used and the money paid to workmen, and the inscription ends with a prayer that the family of the donors might be gratified with the birth of a son. Near it is a magic stone with the figure of a hare surrounded by stars deeply graven in it to represent the moon, and a peacock to represent the sun. A frequent adjunct of many pagodas is the Shway Da, the imprint of the Lord Buddha's foot. It is too nearly square to command a painter or sculptor's praise, and the toes are all of the same length, as may be seen in the examples carried off by Captain Marryat, the novelist in the First Burmese War. Now preserved in the British Museum, the sole is divided into 180 squares, and on them are many lekana representations of monasteries, piathats, tigers, kalawikes, hinthas, parrots, saputi fish, and the likes, to signify that all things were under the feet of the great master. The number of beads on the rosary corresponds with the number of squares on the Sway Zet Da. The most famous example is at the pagoda of that name east of Mandalay, the great resort of the Shans, and another well-known one is opposite Mangwe, inland from Minbu, where the mud volcanoes are the boiling vats of the Nagas. But there are many specimens all over the country, not a few with the figure of a Naga or a sea monster reared over them. Most famous among the small pagodas is the Kyaik Hit Yo. Insignificant in size but unique from its position, the hill on which it stands takes its name from the Paya and is over 3,000 feet high, over 3,500 feet high. On its summit are a number of granitoid boulders, many of them balanced in a most extraordinary way, and all the more surmounted by little shrines. The Kyak Hitai Yo stands on a huge boulder, which itself rests on a projecting rock, separated from the rest of the hill by a chasm fathomless to the eye and reaching to say the villagers far below. The depths of the hill, the boulder stands on the extreme verge of the bare rock and hangs over it as if a gust of wind or a few extra pounds to added would make it topple over and crash down on the dizzy heights far away into the green valley. Below to the shrine, people from all parts of the country, but but more especially the Talaings, come in the month of February and cast jewelry and precious stone into the yawning rift, and clambering up the rock by the aid of a bamboo ladder, cover the playa with flowers and small lighted candles, making it look like a new nebulous constellation from the far off plains. Inquirers are told with the utmost confidence that the pagoda is 5,000 years old. It certainly has been there, time out of mind, and the boulder has solely been kept in its place by the hair buried under the shrine, and given to a hermit by the great Buddha himself. When he returned from Tawai Dengta, the second heaven of the Nat Devas, on the occasion of his preaching the law to his mother, near it is a spring which always flows freely with the crystalline water, unless there is an evil talk among the assembled people, or if the sexes are not separated. A complete thin bangye, the alphabet is graven on the rock. The view from the pagoda is superb. Bounded on the east by the blue Marataban hills, fading away into the dim peaks of Siam, extending southward over tangled jungle and yellow paddy lands to the bright waves of the Gulf of Martaban, Martaban. While to the west, the jeweled speck of the pagoda at Pegu almost leads one to imagine the stately bulk of the sacred Shway Dagon beyond. There are many such shrines on the abrupt limestone hills in the Malmain district, where the devotee has to clamber up bare rock faces and scramble through treacherous debris, occasionally swinging over perilous deep on the precarious footing of a rough bamboo ladder, his offerings tied to his back and his heart between his teeth. And yet, women are found to make the ascent, especially at the Zwe Cabin, the precip- precipitous Duke of York's Nose, some 40 miles of the Sitong River from the Maulmain, where the Englishman is lost in amazement as to how they ever got the bricks and ironwork up the rocks to construct the pagoda and the Hittite. Yet thousands of people scramble up the time of the annual feast, and the pagoda is as well adorned with the offerings as any in the flat lands down by the sea, where a rise of a few feet in the ocean would put hundreds of square miles underwater. Every district pagoda has its special feast, and all are well attended for even though the locality may be thinly populated, there are always to be found visitors from other places round about, partly as a kind of neighborly courtesy, partly because there is always some fun in the shape of a traveling troupe or a marionette play at a pagoda feast, and chiefly there can be no denying from a feeling of genuine piety and a really real desire to acquire merit. Pagoda feasts enable a Burman to see the world as far as it can be seen in his native land. Without the periodical festivals, he would only stop chewing betel in the wattled bothy where he was born to go out and smoke a chair root round his patch of paddy land and speculate on the time when Rangoon of or Bassein broker would come up to buy his crop from him. Most of the district Burmans would never see the Englishman and his doings, were it not from the annual pilgrimage to Rangoon to worship at the Shwe Dagon. During the rest of the year, unless he lives in the headquarters of an assistant commissionership,
All he sees on the British occupation is a stray visit from a young official out shooting or the chance appearance of an inspector of police in search of a criminal. Similarly, very few Burmans except those attracted by business to the capital, where capital would even visit. Oh, sorry. Similarly, very few Burmans, except for those attracted by business to the capital, would ever visit Mandalay were it not for the great Arakan Pagoda. The Mahamuni Paya is rendered especially sacred by the sitting image of the Shin Gautama there preserved, and is on the account regarded by Upper Burmans as not inferior in sanctity to the Shway Dagon itself. The huge brass image, 12 feet high, was brought over the hills from Akyab in the year 1784 or 1146 BE. According to the inscription, the king drew the Arakan Gautama to the shrine by the charm of his piety, but the historical books speak only of rough force of arms. However, that may be. It is a mystery how the huge masses of metal, the figure was cast in three sections, were brought over the steep, pathless mountainsides. The inscription flatters the king, and the monks ascribe the feat to supernatural help, as they do not faultlessly join, as they do the faultless joining together of the pieces. The image was set up so the legend during the lifetime of the great master. The utmost skill, the most persistent energy had failed in fitting the parts together, and the feeling of the pious were fearfully lacerated by the cracking of the head in the futile struggles. But the Buddha, perceiving from afar what was going on, and ever full of pity, came himself to the spot, and embracing the image 7 times, so joined together the fragments that the most skeptical eye cannot detect the points of junction. While the head was restored to its pristine smoothness, so like was the image, and so sublime the engulfance, the effulgence, which like was the sorry, which shone around during the manifestation, that the reverently gazing crowd could not determine which was the model and which was the master. The resemblance had no doubt faded away with the wickedness of later times, for unlike most Burmese images, the Paya Gye has most gross, repulsive features. Inspired by the divine embrace, the figure spoke, but afterwards received the teacher's command never again to open his lips, to open its lips till Arimathea should come to reveal the new law. The shrine in which it stands is one of the most splendid in the country. The image itself is covered by a great 7-roofed pia that, with goodly pillars, the ceiling gorgeous with mosaics, long colonnades supported on 252 pillars, all richly gilt and carved with frescoed roofs and sides lead up to it, and daily from the royal palace used to come sumptuous offerings in stately procession, marshaled by one of the ministers and shaded by the white umbrella, the emblem of the sovereignty and the prerogative of the arbiter of existence. On its first arrival, 120 families of the Arakanese were assigned as slaves of the Paya, and the number was frequently afterwards added to. In a long gallery, there is an enormous number of inscriptions gathered from all parts of the country, many ungilt slabs of marble. A still greater number of sandstone all day long circles of constantly renewed worshippers chant aloud the praises of the Buddha, and the air is heavy with the effluvia of candles, and the odors from thousands of smoldering incense sticks. Within the precedence, precincts. Ooh, man. Within the precincts of the pagoda is a large tank tenanted by a sacred turtle, who wax huge on rice and cakes thrown them by the multitudes of pilgrims, uh, probably not even at the Shway Paya is more enthusiastic devotion shown at the Paya Gye in Mandalay. It is regarded with special reverence by the Shans. Near the royal city, about 9 miles up the river on the river bank, is a huge monster of a pagoda built on a low green bluff, running from the barren pagoda sprinkled Sagaing hills. The groundwork of the great misshapen Mengon Paya is covers a square of 450 feet, and its height is 160 feet, about one third of the elevation intended for it when completed. But Mintaya Gye, the crack-brained monarch who found it, ran short of funds, and the building was stopped. Nature was jealous of the miniature mountain, the large massive brickwork in the world, the largest massive brickwork in the world, and an earthquake in 1838 rent the gigantic cube with fantastic fissures from top to bottom and cast down great masses of masonry, tons upon tons in weight, and yet not sufficient to destroy the main structure, massive and imperishable as time itself. There it stands, unharmed alike by rain, floods, and blistering suns, and laughing even at earthquakes. According to Burmese custom, the Bada Paya built a model for the guidance of workmen. This is called the Panda Paya and is 15 feet high. This consists of a bell-shaped dome surmounted by a sikara, a pointed spire, and resting on a square plinth of solid brickwork. It is a hybrid between the Shway and the Anada pagodas of Pagan, and has all the requirements of a place of worship: circuit walls and staircases, ornamented arches, and leoglyphs. Perhaps it was this proud stability which induced King Mindon Min to attempt an even greater work. He planned a huge shrine to be raised east of Mandalay under the shadow of the Shan Hills. The Yakin Tong Paya was to be larger than the Mengon monster, and it was to be built of stone. A fair-sized hill was hewn into blocks to furnish material. Canals, several miles long, were dug to convey uh, the stones, and huge lighters were built upon them. The whole kingdom was called upon to furnish men to labor a few months at a time on the pious work. Architects, monks, foreigners were called upon to offer suggestions and make plans. A French engineer, who declared that with 5,000 men working every day, it would require 84 hours to complete the original design, came near being crucified on the spot. After 4 years' labor, the basement, some um, some 4 feet high, was completed, and then the con- the convener of the fifth great synod returned to the village of Nats. Thi Ba Min, who succeeded him, was the last man likely to finish the work, and there lie the mountains of square stones and the heaps of rubble for the center. The canals have silted up, and the lighters foundered with the unloaded cargoers, and instead of a monument, King Mindon has simply left a ghastly chaos. What Khan King Mantia what Khan King Mintaya Gye must have had to get so far as he did. The whole neighborhood of Mandalay, Amarapura, and Aba is rich with splendid fanes, but a detailed account of them would only weary the reader, as the visiting of them tires out the non-religious observer. Nevertheless, some must at least be adverted to. There is the the Kuthuda, the royal merit house, the richly gilt shrine built by King Theba's uncle, the war prince, one of the most compact and tastefully adorned of pagodas, with beautifully carved gilt gates, the main spire being surrounded by a triple square of shrines, each shrine containing a marble slab engraved with a chapter of the Bita Ghat on the back and front. The text of the 3 volumes of the Buddhist scripture was carefully collated by the most learned the Sadas, in the royal city and is considered the best extant. Especially interesting also is the Atumashi, the incomparable Paya, the great oblong lofty terrace chapel monastery of Mindon Min, outwardly plain white, but white within splendid, with a gorgeously decorated shrine, purple and scarlet, and gold hanging with velvet carpets. Here were preserved the gold spittoon, betel box, kalawaik, and other paraphernalia of its founder. Unhappily, it was burnt in 1892. Down the river, there are hundreds of others of every variety and the degree of decoration. There is the Nagayon Paya, the whole building wrought into the form of a dragon, the huge round domed Kong Hmuda, and the King's Victory Pagoda. At the Sagaing, the golden cock scratching on the other side, commemorating a favorite legend of the boundless charity of the Buddha. There are glistening white pinnacles of the flashing gold spires far up the Sagaing hill, with thousands of steps wending in wearily up upon the steep, rough hillside, and gazing up to them from the Amarapura sides are great massy temples, frowning over the river with all the stern solidity of a knightly hold. Each has its legend, some tales of bloodshed of piety, some event in Burmese history or birth story of the Buddha. Most renowned, however, is the for its pagoda is Pagan, in many respects the most remarkable religious city in the world. Jerusalem, Rome, Kiev, Benares, none of them can boast the multitude of temples and the lavishness of design and ultimate and ornament that make marvelous the deserted capital on the Irrawaddy. Deserted is practically Deserted it practically is, for the few flimsy huts that stand by the river are inhabited only by pagoda slaves and men condemned to perpetual beggary. For 8 miles along the river bank and extending to a depth of 2 miles inland, the whole space is thickly studded with pagodas of all sizes and shapes, and the very ground is so thickly covered with crumbling remnants of vanished shrines that, according to the popular saying, you cannot move foot or hand without touching a sacred thing. Some of the zetis are all but perfect. Restored by the pious, they stand out glistening snow white, only to render more striking the orrery, weather-beaten ruins of the less cared for neighbors. Here, the bell-shaped solid pyramids of Lower Burma is rarely seen. The religious structures fully merit the word temple, as understood in ordinary language. To quote Yule, who gives a detailed account at the principal shrine in his mission to Ava, there are all kinds. The bell-shaped pyramid of dead brickwork in all its varieties, the same raised over a square of octagonal cell containing an image of the Buddha, the bluff knob-like dome of the Ceylon Dagobats, with the square caps which seem to have characterized the most ancient Buddhist Chaintyas, as represented in the sculpture at Sanchi and in the ancient model pagodas found near the Buddhist remains in India. The fantastic Bhupaya or pumpkin pagoda, which seemed rather like a fragment of what we might conceive the architecture of the moon, that anything terrestrial, and many variations of these types, but the predominant and characteristic form is that of the cruciform vaulted pagoda temple, whatever. I was reading the next paragraph, and I said pagoda, whatever. Okay. The Irrawaddy, just below the Pagan, widens out like a gigantic lake to over 2 miles in breadth, and the view of the sacred city from the far down the river is particularly fine. Towering above the others rise the great temple of the Anans, and Gawaldoplin. Like visions of the old world cathedral straight into the desert, round about them gradually rise into view hoary round towers like a border peel, airy minarets as of an underground mosque, apparitions like the pyramids chiseled into fairy terraced fretwork, huge bulbous mushrooms like slim lanterns on their backs, like the wide studio of a mad architect. There is a memorial like there's a memorial line which, placing letters for numbers, declares the sum of total of the pagoda to be 999. Probably, however, there are not nearly so many in anything like a complete state. Pagan ceased to be the capital in 1284 AD. The Emperor of China had sent a vast army to avenge the murder of an ambassador. The Burmese king pulled down 1,000 arch temples, 1,000 smaller ones, and 4,000 square temples to strengthen the fortifications. But a prophecy found under one of the desecrated shrines robbed him of his courage, and he fled to the south. And ever since, Pagan has remained in its present practically deserted state. The whole ground within the old walls is strewn with bricks and mortar. Some of the zetis are strangled with a jungle growth. Huge bushes spring from their summits and sides and tear the masonry asunder. And with the vast majority, no attempt is made to arrest the ravagers of time. But Mr. Ta Sein Ko says in his report of 1908, numerous terracotta tiles have been found in the basements and corridors of several of the pagodas. They illustrate scenes in the Jataka's and in the life of the Buddha Gautama. They are of two types, in the Anada and the Shway. The tiles are enameled green and show Chinese influence. In the Pet Lake Pagoda, they are of red baked clay and have southern Indian resemblances. All three shrines belong to the 11th century AD. The stone sculptures in the Anada are fine in the pose, drapery, and contour are distinctly Indian. In the Sain Niet Pagoda, halfway between Mien Pagan and Thie Piet Saya of the 11th century, the Chinese influence preponderates. The twin Pets Lake Pagoda are at Thie Piet Saya. Few, if any, contain actual relics. The cloistered and terrace temples are simply receptacles for huge images of the Buddha, and others, the corridor of the Anada, the Gadapalan, are filled with sculptured groups representing the events in the life of the great master. The figures of eminent disciples and the Yaha, Yahanda. In the central recesses, where are the colossal figures of the Buddha, the light is cunningly emitted from above so as to fall on the calm gilded face, producing a most weird and striking effect. But Pagan would require a monograph itself, and with it should be compared Shwegu between Mandalay and Bahama. That sacred island is a perfect forest of pagodas, and only fails to obtain wider fame because of the existence of Pagan. There are 999 shrines within its limits, and a much larger proportion of these exist intact than is the case with Pagan, though none of them can compare with the magnificence of the Anada. The question of the architecture of the Pagan temples, which is so different in style from that found in other parts of Burma, has been fully discussed in Yule's admirable mission to Ava. His omits the however to notice the fact that Anarawada Sa Min, when he established Buddhism in Pagan, built all the pagodas and temples after the exact model of those existing in Thaton, in the same order and of the same size. The town of Thaton, above Mall Main, was the first settlement of Thon and Otara. The missionaries from central India, who introduced the teachings of the Lord Buddha into Burma. There was certainly an ancient Hindu colony there, and its inhabitants may have brought some notion of their architecture with them. But whether this to be so or not, Burmans find source for pride in the admitted fact that there is nothing in India to compare with the classical beauty of some of the smaller temples of the stupendous architectural majesty of the Anada or this Ta Pia Nu. The following song, okay, I'm not doing the song because my voice hurts and I won't do it any justice. I'll probably go back and do all the nursery rhymes and songs in this book in separate videos, and I'll just title them as such. So if you want to hear me read the song, I'll title the video something like "The Gilding of the Shway Ma Da." Pegu was the capital of the Talaing kingdom of Hantawadi. Shingatama foretold that it would be founded in the 16th century, or the one, I don't know how to say, in the 1116th century. Like, I don't know how to say that year of his religion, and gave two of his heirs to two brothers, Mahalathala and Sulathala, to enshrine on the Thudathana Miyintila hill, a pagoda 50 cubits high and erected over them, and this was the original of the Shwe Ma Da Paya. So lots of descriptions of architecture and names. There was some really good, like, vivid descriptions that I was able to latch onto and sort of build, these sort of put like things in my head. But if you're not reading this book for descriptions of pagodas, and you're looking for more like historical, sort of just like historical explanations for pagodas, this probably skim through this. There's some sections in this chapter that are good, like the bit at the end about the differences between the architectural styles between the Indian and the more recent Buddhist style pagodas are interesting. But the beginning, just generally defining pagodas and like how and why they are built the way they are is pretty interesting. Where they are, but I'm gonna cut the video here. So thank you for watching. Hope you enjoyed, and see you next time.